Hi everyone, it's Eve Blowitz from spiritgirl.com and welcome to the Spirit Girl Talk Show podcast. I'm super excited to be here with you today and our very special guest who is Mitch Ablett, who is a clinical psychologist, author of numerous books and consultant. He is a guest speaker, keynote speaker, a podcast host, and he has a brand new book which you can pre-order now, which is Prize Worthy: How to Meaningfully Connect, Build Character, and Unlock the Potential of Every Child. Mitch Ablett, welcome to the Spirit Girl podcast show. I'm super grateful and honored to be here with you today and with our global audience as well. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me, Yvette.
This is going to be super fun. I'm so happy that before we hit the record, I got the pleasure to find out that you've been down under here in Australia 3 times as part of your work.
Yes. Yeah, it's been a number of years, but 3 different speaking tours to mostly therapists down there for about 2 weeks each time. So I've been around the country and loved it. It's awesome.
Oh, we love having you here virtually as well as part of the Spirit Girl Book Club and book podcast. But before we dive into your book, Mitch, are you happy to tell our audience a little bit about yourself and how you actually got into the field of becoming a clinical psychologist and wanting to help people in the mental health space?
Well, I didn't originally set out to be a psychologist. I was a history major and an English minor in college, my undergraduate. And I was dead set on becoming a Supreme Court, justice, or maybe an appellate judge. So I was going to go to law school, and I did. And so I went to law school at Florida State University, and my age-old issue with anxiety cropped up again. Social anxiety in particular. The idea of doing something like this would have literally given me a panic attack when I was a young kid. And I did very well in college, but the anxiety in law school just got out of control. So I ended up quitting with no plan. And I was literally sitting at home. I was lying to my family that I was still in law school. And I was watching talk shows and totally depressed. And you can't make this up. I was watching I don't know if you've heard of it, the Jerry Springer show here in the U.S.
Yes, I remember that as a kid. It was chaotic.
It was chaos. And I'm watching this show. I'm like, oh my God, these people need help. Who does that? And I had never taken a psych class. I did not know any psychologists, never been exposed. I grew up in rural Ohio as a young kid. I was the second person on either side of my family to even go to college. And so that was literally my first thought about, well, maybe I could do that. So I started reading, and then I went back and did post-baccalaureate psych work, did research with a professor, and then got into graduate school and got my doctorate, my PhD in clinical psych. So,
wow, that's incredible.
You can't make that up.
Oh my goodness. I do remember that Jerry Springer show, and it was chaos. And then thank goodness the Oprah Winfrey show came on, which was the absolute opposite, which really inspired me when it came to self-help books and spirituality and things like that. Now, Mitch, your parents were obviously really happy that you decided to change what you were studying and still stay in education.
Yes.
At the time, though, when you were studying psychology, it was still very much a taboo topic, wasn't it? Like depression and mental health.
Yeah.
Because we're still in 2021 breaking down mental health stigmas that stem from the 70s or the 60s or the 50s or the 40s or whatever it might be.
Right.
What did your friends or family think when you told them, I've dropped out of law and I'm doing psychology?
They were fine with it. They thought it was a better fit for me. I had always been a more intuitive type person, a deep feeler, could really kind of read into things with people. there just been no one in my family that had any experience with psychotherapy, because that just was not a thing where I grew up in Ohio. And so, but they were fine with it as long as I was moving forward and I was happy and I had a plan. But it is true what you're saying, that even still there's the stigma. And what is definitely the case then, and still some degree now, and what led to my very first book, was that therapists themselves don't talk enough about their own struggles. We have some of the highest suicide rates of any profession. And, we are human beings and not immune to stress and anxiety, depression, all of it. So I make a regular habit of talking pretty openly about how I've had struggles. Like I was just referencing my anxiety issues. That's what actually led me not only into becoming a better therapist, but I wouldn't have gotten into the mindfulness world. I wouldn't have become a meditator. And I certainly wouldn't have ended up writing and publishing about mindfulness related issues unless I had started to get with my own stuff.
You are very big on self-care. You have a really great message for therapists or anyone who's a giver and looking after people, which is always to care for yourself first.
Yes.
And then you have that full cup to care for others.
Yes.
Do you feel that therapists, because they're so busy these days, especially during the global pandemic, that self-care sometimes can fall to the wayside? But in your experience, if you're not looking after yourself, the detrimental effects on your own health?
Absolutely. Particularly, I think it's always been stressful to be a psychotherapist, particularly during COVID. I had no dip in my private practice work, during COVID, even though I went from seeing everyone live in my office to no one live, and it was all virtual, still is. I will in the fall start seeing at least some people, but the world has changed, and I don't think it'll be the rare therapist that goes entirely back to full live sessions, which could end up being a good thing in terms of access to services. But it's been incredibly stressful for me personally. The colleagues of mine I've talked to, it's been really hard on them. There's something that doesn't get talked about enough, at least not that I'm aware of, that part of the rejuvenation of being a therapist is that live encounter where you get the nonverbals more fully than you ever can online, and you get the person's presence and being with them, even if there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of suffering. It can give back to you. You have a more direct conduit to knowing that your presence is engaging theirs, and there's an exchange, and that helps sustain you. But when you're spending all day staring at your computer, you end up missing out on that piece. So I think it just burns us out more, just the tech side of it, but then the specific content of how much people are suffering. And therapists are super busy. In a given week, I do 35 to 40 patient hours, which is a lot.
Yeah,
it's an awful lot. And, so it's been very hard. It's made it crucial for me to maintain my own meditation practice, to be much more consistent around things like my diet and other habits around fitness and whatnot. But I worry that at times, I'm not fully attending to all of that the way I need to. I'll just take on more work. So I've actually started to try and slow down, create more space for things that are creative, which is also very rejuvenating for me, and try to scale back my practice a bit. I know I'm not alone, that a lot of therapists are struggling.
What inspired you to become an author? Because there's a lot of work that goes into writing books.
A little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So what inspired you to go down the author path?
In addition to the law school thing, I had also had since childhood fantasy of one day being the next Kurt Vonnegut, being a fiction author, a novelist, and would write short stories as a, high school student and in college and whatnot. And so, I got out of law school, got into psych, but then in my second year of graduate school, I wasn't curing everybody in 3 sessions or less as a new therapist. And it was getting stressful. So I almost bailed on that to pursue the writing path and to get a master's in fine arts and creative writing. And so I thought it was either one or the other. Either I'm going to be a practicing psychologist or I'm going to be an author. So I ended up not quitting grad school. Thankfully, I had a mentor who actually was the mentor who inspired the concept for my prize-worthy book that's coming. He gave me the term prizing, but he helped support me in staying put and not doing another round of quitting and jumping to the greener grass on the other side of the fence. And so I stayed, and yet I had this fantasy of writing and publishing. So starting in graduate school, I started reaching out to literary agents, publishing houses, book ideas. No. Most of them just form letter rejection slips. One of which I believe, I have somewhere in a folder, is from my current literary agent from back then before she knew me. And
I love it.
Yeah. And so I kept trying to force that to happen, and it was not happening. And so I ended up winning a pretty significant writing award for a short story I wrote back in 2004. And I thought that was going to set me on the path of publishing books. But even then, I still couldn't get anyone to take me seriously. So I gave up. I gave up trying to publish a book. Long story short, it was my first trip down under when the person that brought me down there to do the speaking tour was like, bring in any of your books or your CDs, DVDs, and we'll sell them here.
Wow.
Like, I don't have any. And she's like, well, self-publish something and just bring it. So I have one copy left, a very crappy self-published workbook that's basically a Microsoft Word document that ended up becoming my first book, The Heat of the Moment and Treatment. Basically mindfulness practice for the therapist to manage their reactivity to their work. So I took that self-published thing to Australia and then sold them all out. People are so gracious and curious. As people bought all the copies of that workbook, which blew me away because it's really ridiculous looking. The content is good, but the cover was like a fuzzy PDF thing. It was ridiculous. But then I got an email, and I had put it on Amazon. It wasn't selling. But I got an email from, I couldn't believe it. I thought it was spam at first. It was the vice president of W.W. Norton Books in Manhattan. Are you the author of this self-published workbook? We'd like to talk to you about rewriting it and publishing it as a Norton book. And so after all those years of trying to force that outcome, and it eluded me, despite having, I think, good ideas and a decent enough writer and whatnot. But when I let go of the control and just showed up to what mattered and just spoke the truth of what mattered, I was speaking about this long before I published. Then it came to me. And then that led to me meeting other people, led to other books.
Wow, that is such an inspirational story, because it shows how, like, when you were a kid, you had this fascination to be wanting to become an author. And I can resonate with this because as soon as I saw Louise Hay on the Oprah Winfrey show, I was like 8 years old and thinking, I could write a book like her and get on the Oprah Winfrey show. Oh, what if I could help people? Oh, I could get paid to talk. Like, this is what you got to do. Write a book, help people. What a life. But what is fascinating is you were trying to force it, which I can also resonate with that, because I was trying to get my first book deal. And then an opportunity came up just to self-publish, to make it happen. And from there, what's so fascinating with your story is just from the Australian lady saying, hey, what do you got? And you rose to the occasion to get something, even if it wasn't perfect.
Right.
You just did it. You made it happen. The Australian crowd went wild over it, like it sold.
Yeah.
And they really resonated with it. And just from there, after it's circulating in this short form, like you said, it was a little bit ridiculous the way it looked and what it was. But
very ridiculous.
It's incredible how then through Amazon and word of mouth and how things over time circulate. And it's a really inspiring story, because I'm sure there's many of our listeners who want to write books, whether it's a kid's book, fiction, nonfiction, whatever it might be. But it's a good reminder how you might have something that you're passionate about as a kid.
Yes.
And to see how many decades it takes. And to think, had you not actually rose to the occasion and done the self-published book, like we might not be here today, Mitch, having this conversation about Prizeworthy.
Right.
So next we're going to go on to Prizeworthy. What is the meaning behind the title?
So it's prizeworthy, not praiseworthy. So I made up a word, prize. I'm pretty sure that's not a word, at least not yet. It was a term, prizing, that came to me from my mentor that I referenced earlier. He said to me in graduate school, he's like, Mitch, don't just praise others. Don't just praise your clients. You have to prize them. And I remember when he said that to me, and it had an impact on me in that moment. I was super curious about that. I never heard that frame given to me before. And it really planted a really deep seed. And I think the way it really germinated was he was prizing of me. And by that, I mean, he didn't just say, hey, you're a good therapist, good job on that class, or, you're really good at X. That's praise. Praise is often praise as usual, as I like to call it. It's research has shown it can be problematic, particularly with kids, that if you do it in a way where it's highly contingent, and by that I mean the kid feels like I have to do this stuff in order for them to accept me or to feel like I'm worthy. So that contingency of performance or creating an outcome can actually be really stressful for kids. And also if praise is about their whole person, like you are so smart or you are so creative, like the whole being, it sets a very high bar for the other person, for a kid in particular, because no one's smart in every situation. No one's creative in every situation. And some people have anxiety issues. Some people have ADHD. And so even though they may have lots of cognitive or emotional talents, they can't always show it. And so praise that is about the whole person, or it's about behavior that they can't fully control, research has shown that it can really get in the way in terms of development for kids. Prizing is not about the future and not about the past. It's about the present moment. And it's I like to call it the peekaboo moment. Like when you play peekaboo with a baby, it's the adult looking at that kid older than a baby and saying in some way, shape, or form, or showing, I see you in this moment, showing up to this moment. And I see you trying to manage emotional pain or discomfort. I see you trying to go for it around something that matters to you. And that matters to me, that you are in this moment, either in that pain or that thing that you really want to be possible for yourself. So prizing is about the presence of the adult. They've fully shown up to that moment, and they drop their agendas of controlling what that kid does next. And it's like they've made a clearing, like an emotional clearing in the forest. And they invite the kid to sit down in that clearing with them. I see you.
Wow, this is fascinating. What
Yeah,
I've observed when I was traveling over on a day trip to the Whitehaven Beach, which is in Whitsundays, very beautiful, Mitch, add that to your tourism list,
sure.
was there were parents busy on their phone, so head down. Maybe they were looking at Facebook, Instagram, I'm not quite sure, but they were heavily connected to the phone.
Yes.
Their child was actually wanting to get their attention. Mom, 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 I need to go to the toilet. But in that moment, the parents were so engrossed in whatever they were watching or looking at that they didn't hear what the child's needs were.
Right.
We obviously did as guests on the boat. And so what ended up happening was quite a few people were like, oh, we think your child needs you. But they
Yes.
were just so on social media, addicted to whatever they were looking at,
Yes.
that they really missed what their child was doing. Can we practice prize-worthy more just simply by putting our mobile phone down if a child comes to us to want to ask us something?
Yes.
Would that be a first good step instead of trying to multitask?
Well, I'm a firm believer there is no multitasking. It's an illusion, So yeah, and I've been that parent many times. My kids are 7 and 11. My classic story is that I'm sitting at a park down the street when my son was a 6-month-old and my daughter was about 4. And my daughter's on the other side of the seesaw wanting me to bounce her, and my son is still in his stroller. I've got my phone out and I'm texting with this is a couple books in to my publishing career. I'm texting with my co-author, hey dude, what's the title going to be to our mindfulness book for kids?
I love your honesty. I love your honesty, because we often think therapists have all got it together and they're this, put them up on the pedestal. You just remind us you're human beings or
Yeah.
spiritual beings, and you have the same challenges with technology. So in that moment, though, was that when you reflected, became self-aware?
No.
So how did the self-awareness come into this?
It happened when an elderly woman who I did not know, was sitting there in the park, and she was of Asian descent. She came over. So I'm sitting there and I get a tap on my shoulder from this elderly Asian woman, and she says something in a language I don't understand. And she goes like this. And I'm like, okay, awkward moment. And I'm like, well, maybe she's referencing my son, he's 6 months old. He is really cute. And I just wanted the awkward moment to be gone. So here I am taking him out of his stroller, handing him to this complete stranger so she can hold him.
Oh my goodness.
And she laughs and she goes, says something else. And she points at him again, goes like this, and then points right at me.
Ooh. Oh, I've got what she's saying.
Yes. She didn't like yell or anything, but
No.
she gave me what I call a compassionate dope slap.
Compassionate dope slap.
Yeah, which is something I ended up writing about in the book, because prizing is not about just rainbows and unicorns, warm and fuzzies with kids. Because I've spent a career working with kids with significant behavior issues. Prizing is about presence in the moment, even if it entails a compassionate, not actually hitting a kid,
yes,
but an emotional like directness and setting a limit, setting a consequence. But from compassion, assertive compassion versus just avoiding the issue, or just like focusing on feelings only. So she gave me a compassionate dope slap. And I was like, oh my God, I just got schooled in mindful parenting, even though I am starting to write about this stuff.
Wow. That's
So
incredible.
yeah, I think people do that because we all as parents are overwhelmed, and we
Mm,
have habit loops of trying to distract ourselves. The phone is great for it. It's a great way to just take a little break, but it can become
mm,
this really vicious habit where you're missing every moment that you're around your
wow.
kids. And so it's not as simple as just put your phone down. I mean, that would be great if it worked that way. It's about developing a very strong intention that I want to start showing up to more moments with my kids. So prizing is not about a script of like, say this, do this. It really, and I spent like more than half of the book helping parents or teachers or therapists, whomever have kids in their lives, be able to really build that mindset that includes a very strong intention to not miss all these moments with your kids.
Wow. I'm so glad that lady came up to you in the park and obviously was sharing her mindfulness and presence and practice, which, because I've been over to Hong Kong as an example and had the pleasure of meeting a 100-year-old woman doing pull downs and seeing them all doing the Tai Chi
Yes.
and their presence in parks with their family or themselves is incredible.
Yes.
So she's basically saying, put your phone down, get your son and connect with him versus whoever you're connecting with on the phone. And what an incredible wisdom, even if you couldn't understand exactly in the moment, but you got that profound message. What are some other ways to cultivate prize-worthy with your children? So one, we're going to show up and be present.
Yeah.
Our intent is to be with them,
Yes.
which my mum was able to do very easily back in the day when I grew up in the 70s because there was no technology. You couldn't get hold of people on the weekends or
Right.
but we're in this world now that's 24/7. But what's another way if a parent's out there wanting to be prize-worthy with their children?
A mindfulness practice of any sort is going to help with it because it builds a foundation of getting present in your daily life and getting out of your mind and out of all the rush of thoughts so that you get, it's like they suck you in a rabbit hole, as does the phone. And, they suck you into the rabbit hole of the future or the past instead of what actually you have, which are these moments in the present. So doing any, whether it's sitting practice, formal practice, focusing on the sensation of your breathing, focusing on a sound, mantra, basic, doing yoga, but something to anchor your attention in the present moment is kind of a prerequisite. You don't have to go on retreat 5 times a year. You don't have to become a monastic, but I think practicing showing up in a general way creates more possibility that you're going to be able to show up to prizing kids in specific moments, particularly the moments that have heat, that have charge to it, where kids are pushing buttons, and you're reactive. If you've built that foundation with basic mindfulness practice, you're more able to stay in that moment. So the core with that as a prerequisite, the real essence of prizing a kid is that you get so present, you drop your agendas of controlling what happens next. So you show up to curiosity, that it'll be a question in your mind, very, very clear. What matters to them? What need are they trying to meet? What pain point is pushing at things for them? I really want to understand. I want to show up to it. I want them to see me curious about it. And then it becomes about showing up to that curiosity, that question. What's behind things for this kid? Not focusing on the exterior of their behavior, like if they're on their phone too much, instead of like, get off your phone. What makes that so important in this moment for you? Help me understand.
I love that, the curiosity. And I couldn't help think with your book, Prizeworthy, how nearly parents now have to become, quote unquote, their own therapist or a therapist, as in sitting down or spending time with their child with the no judgment,
Yeah.
not controlling it, and kind of understanding why are they doing that, or why are they on their phone? Why
Yeah.
have they disconnected and don't want to come out of their room? So
Right.
the curiosity part, without just saying, yelling at them or telling them to
Right.
put their phone down, trying to get to the core of that. I hear a very big speaker out of America, Gary V or Gary
Mhm.
Vaynerchuk.
Yes.
He is very big on, he doesn't believe that children should receive, I think it's a seventh ribbon, or there's many, many ribbons. He really feels that giving every child a ribbon and telling them they're awesome at running when they're really not isn't really what a child needs. He believes that build resilience, you need to learn to lose, and you've
Yes.
got to get used to the feelings of losing.
Yeah.
And we can't say losing, you're amazing. What are your thoughts on all of this when it comes to prizing or prize-worthy? Should every kid get a ribbon just to say you are amazing? But really, if
So
they're coming eighth, they're not going to go to the Olympics. They've got to put a bit more effort into their running, perhaps.
I don't know Gary personally. I've read some of his work. I've followed him a bit, and I know he has a very large personality and has been a very, obviously very successful marketing guru of sorts. Here's the thing. I agree with him. And I think I think this is, I may have a different way of explaining it.
Yeah.
When
Wow.
I say that all kids are prize worthy, it does not mean they all deserve a trophy. They all deserve a ribbon. And there's a lot of that here in the US. You know, everybody gets a prize. So it sounds kind of paradoxical. Every child is prize worthy, but that doesn't mean they all get the same prize or they all get a ribbon, even though they have not shown the skill, they have slacked off, or they have not engaged the contest and whatever it is, or they haven't really gotten the grade. Well, let's just give them something anyway. That's inauthentic. And it sends a message to kids because they know they don't have that skill. They know that they haven't shown up, and yet they're given this ribbon anyway. Adults need to think about that. When you give them the ribbon or the trophy anyway, you're sending them the message that I don't think you can handle it if I don't give it to you. Versus, I think that there is a prize in you of effort, of trying to take care of yourself, of trying to manage emotional discomfort. You do the best you can with the skills that you have, and yet you're not an astronaut. You're not a concert pianist. That may not be your bag. So I'm not going to give you a trophy for playing soccer because you didn't win. You didn't show the skill. And yet I'm going to let you know that I see you showing up to X, Y, or Z, particularly inside yourself. And that matters to me.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. Prizing is not about an external. It's about the we of interaction between the adult and the child. If you give somebody a ribbon, great. If they've earned it, great. I actually think all that stuff is crap if it isn't also associated or correlated with what I call prizing. Here's this trophy. And by the way, kid, you brought it. You showed up, even though that's prizing. So even though there was a trophy or a ribbon, what is it that really resonated with the kid? The prizing. I think all kids are prize worthy. And I've worked with kids with atrocious behavior, huge psychopathology. They've never won an actual like sporting contest. They've never gotten the A, but they're still prize worthy because they show up as best they can, and you meet them where they're at and say, peekaboo, I see you.
I love that. Peekaboo, I see you, because this is incredible. I'm so glad we're having this discussion. It just reminded me when I was a kid. This is how I had to get either the first prize, second or third, by showing up and putting the effort in. My dad literally created a sand pit in the backyard of my Aussie home where I could do long jump. He then brought me this silver big, it was rectangle to pretend it was like a shot put. I then had to get up at 5 a.m. in the morning and go jogging with other kids from school or by myself.
Yes.
And put the repetition in, the repetition. And he taught me, if you want to be the greatest runner, because he gave me a book, the Book of Running. Read this and you are going to have to put the effort in, the work. And if you want to be a good runner, that's what you got to do. But I'm so grateful for that because it taught me if I didn't show up every day, and I'm literally having to go every day to do these activities every day, whether I'm tired or not, and to discover, okay, this year I didn't put enough effort in. I didn't win. I got third. But then it taught me I had to put more effort in, craft my skill. And I think I loved how you said that just giving a child, say, the seventh ribbon would be inauthentic. Because I would know too, I knew even as a kid when I came third, the reason why.
That's right.
Because I knew the other girl, Narelle Nielsen, who probably listened to this podcast show, who kicked my butt, was coming first. And I knew how many times she was at training, as in running school or training. So I knew in order to kick her butt, I had to put a lot more effort in running. So you are right. As kids, we are still intelligent to know we're not worthy of the seventh ribbon, because what have we done? We just showed up and we got to do it because it's a school thing. So Mitch, with your children, how are some ways that you now bring prizeworthy into your day-to-day life with your own family and kids?
As I've already done a couple of times in this conversation, I haven't always been great at it. I F it up on a regular basis and either get too much in my own stuff, including while I was writing Prizeworthy. I can't talk to you right now. I'm in here doing this thing. And so I've had to build self-compassion and do compassionate dope slapping with myself. So I've had to not beat myself up when I slip and get too self-focused or distracted. And I've also had to nudge myself to engage. And it's usually something around just the simple peekaboo moments. Go in, find them, and find what matters to them in that moment and let them know that you see it and that it matters to you, that something matters to them. You know, with my daughter, it'll be letting her know that I can see her feeling into others. Whatever abilities I have around empathy and compassion, she's got this raw, ongoing radar dish for feeling people that is truly way beyond me. But instead of saying to her, you are this whole person, I let her know when I see her showing up to it and that it matters to me, that she's showing up to that verb form of it, where it's much more accurate to focus on others and ourselves as verbs than nouns. We're changing, we're dynamic. Like you as a runner, you were doing the verb form of excellence in running. And I would argue, you tell me that it was the showing up to that verb form of excellence that mattered way more than whatever the result was. That was feedback. And then you wanted to show up to the verb form of excellence, and likely because your father saw that in you.
You're right. He did see that in me. He really did. He saw I had potential to run. My other cousin was breaking all the records and she had long legs too. But I also feel that he thought it was a good way to keep me off the streets.
Well, there you go.
Out of drugs and all of these things. But, Mitch, I want to ask, because you do psychology, I know you're big on Buddhism, meditation, mindfulness. So you've got your positive psychology, but then you had your own struggles with anxiety.
Yes.
When you were studying, and I'm sure so many students or people at university who are studying psychology right now, or just with the global pandemic, can resonate when it comes to anxiety. But what drew you in to mindfulness and meditation? And what was the moment you thought, you know what, I might give this a go?
Well, as has been the case with a lot of my path, I was not a meditator until I was already a psychologist. When I was in training in graduate school, I came across John Kabat-Zinn's best-selling book, Wherever You Go, There You Are. And I remember looking at that, and this is back in the mid-90s, when mindfulness was really first starting to become a thing at least in the West. I was like, this is crap. This is like, this is hooey. And
it was a bit woo-woo.
Yeah, and I remember I had a client a long time ago who was a Buddhist. I'm like, yeah, that's fringe new agey stuff. I knew nothing about it. I judged it. I bought into a narrative in my mind, and it took many years in my own suffering, which was not only the anxiety, but it was also burning out as a therapist. I was working with really acute clinical stuff, and I was a clinical director. I was responsible for a team of about 20 therapists, and they're struggling. So I was desperate to find tools, and I started reading about a specific psychotherapy that is mindfulness based called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, wow, this is really cool stuff. It's very scientifically validated. There's lots of research. It's actually based in behaviorism and like learning theory, and yet it's consistent with mindfulness. And so I started to, unlike anything else I had been taught as a therapist, instead, like psychodynamic methods or cognitive behavioral methods where I would learn it and then just use it on people, I actually took the ACT material and applied it to myself and practiced it. And then I became a daily meditator. And then I drank the Kool-Aid. I was completely in, because I didn't have to believe anything. I didn't have to have an expert or a research study validate it. I had my own data.
Love that. You had your own data. But isn't it incredible that when you probably started this mindfulness practice, it really was woo-woo? I remember the Aussie guys, they really thought all of that was a load of crap. What's your practice like every day? Do you sort of sit down to do breathing techniques? Do you do guided meditations? Like, how do you fit the meditation in when you're so busy being an author, a speaker, a psychologist? Like, you got a lot going on, and you've got kids.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't formally sit in meditation practice as much as I used to. My habit pattern is, if I work out, I usually, not always, I'd say it's about 70% of the time, 75% of the time, that I'll sit for 10, 15 minutes after I've worked out. I'm a martial artist. So after I do an MMA styled workout, I'll then pull out my meditation bench, and actually in this room, this is both my dojo and my office. And
I love it.
I'll sit down for a bit. But, this is where the content helps the process, because I end up talking to people that are my patients, so much about mindfulness, or doing things like this, talking about the writing that I've done, speaking about it. It becomes an informal mindfulness bell to drop more fully into those moments. So I have formal practice, and I don't do anything fancy. There's not like some super advanced technique that after you practice for long enough, they say, okay, now you're ready. We'll give you the high level stuff. And anyone that tries to really convince you that they've got some uber high level or advanced practice, they're just trying to rip you off. You know, if they're, and also if they're claiming to be enlightened, they're trying to rip you off. So it's the simple stuff, showing up to the moment. So when I'm formally practicing, I'll start with just mindfulness of the breath, and then I'll let it expand to more true mindfulness of whatever I'm experiencing in that moment in any of my senses, and then add in the mind. And then I will just rest in that awareness without having to focus on a particular object like the sensations of my breath. But that's formal. That's when I'm sitting over there on my bench. But in a conversation like this, it's like when my mind goes away into thoughts and I'm distracted by some bodily sensation or an emotion, come back to that plus all else that is in the screen that is awareness right now, like a movie screen, and just